I am Cassandra Andrews, 36, and I run a resort restaurant group out of Chicago. Last week, my brother told me I was welcome at the church but not the reception, then called me the restaurant's garbage collector. My parents tried to smooth it over the way people do when appearances matter more than fairness. So I did what I should have done years ago. I set a boundary and kept it. While they counted worth by a guest list, I was building kitchens that stand up to cameras and clocks, and I was negotiating fractional jet shares to keep training on time. When a national news crew asked to film how we really work, I said yes on my terms. That night, the city watched young cooks hold their line, and by the time the credits rolled, my phone lit with names I knew better than to answer. What happens when the woman you dismiss stops auditioning for her own family and starts running through her own door? Stay with me, and I will show you how one wedding insult became a line in the sand and why the people who shut me out came knocking. I was reviewing the prep calendar for Chicago when my phone lit up with Jason's name. The late afternoon quiet in River North felt like it always does in the lull before dinner service. A soft hum from the HVAC, the distant clink of metal from the test kitchen, a city river sliding past the windows like a green ribbon. I answered out of habit, more than hope. He went straight to the point in that flat voice he uses when he thinks feelings are a waste of time. My invitation covers the ceremony at St. Patrick's Cathedral. The reception at the Pierre is very exclusive. He treated the words like they were scheduling notes, something to deliver, and move past. I let the sentence sit pen poised over a line item about rotating a young garde-manger onto a busier station. Then I asked why. Not with a plea, not with disbelief. Just a clear question, the same one I would ask if a delivery truck had missed its window. He lowered his voice, and I could hear the curl of a smile that never reaches his eyes. He said I was just a wedding chef at best, the restaurant's garbage collector, and that people of a certain class might feel uncomfortable if I showed up. The phrase landed with a slap and then began to cool the way a burn goes from pain to a dull throb if you keep moving. I looked at the river outside and thought about how many versions of that sentence I had swallowed over the years, sugared as jokes, softened as advice delivered, as if I should be grateful for the feedback. I kept my tone steady, the one I use with a bank auditor or a health inspector. I said I run a resort restaurant group. I said my fractional jet ownership exists purely for operations to keep training on time and emergencies manageable, not for show. I said the real issue was respect. I did not pour in evidence. I did not describe payroll or inspections or the early mornings when I check cooler logs myself. Respect is not a resume. It is a way of speaking and a way of showing up. He made a short sound that could have turned into a laugh if I let it. I did not. I ended the call with a sentence as clean as a wiped prep table. From now on, we have no relationship. The office went very quiet. I set the phone down and listened for a moment to the building breathing. The air felt clearer, like a kitchen after the bleach had dried. 14 minutes until the tasting team would trickle in to argue about a winter salad that still wanted to be two different ideas. I picked up the phone again and called Alicia, our PR director. She is the person I trust when something needs to be taken out of the wind and filed properly. I told her we were splitting every channel of contact. My personal number would remain private. Any family outreach that reached the company in any form would be screened by PR under policy and logged like any other communication. Please write a short protocol, I said. Simple, clear, nothing theatrical. She said she would send a draft before dinner service. I opened my laptop and sent a brief note to the leadership team. Family matters are off limits during shifts. If you hear chatter about anything personal, route it to PR. Your focus is the plate in front of you and the person beside you. We are a kitchen, not a town square. I reread the sentence and felt my shoulders drop a fraction. Sometimes leadership is a calm directive that saves the staff from having to guess. I looked over the week and made changes in quiet, practical strokes that always make me feel like I have both hands back on the wheel. I moved a new cook's training shift so she could shadow Lena during the first rush on Wednesday and learn how a station breathes when tickets multiply. I asked Marcus to bring the fish invoice upstairs before lunch so we could reconcile the delivery weights without a scramble. I added a note to the Chicago roster saying I would be in by 7 the next morning. It is easier to keep rumors away from a workplace when the person at the center of it is walking the floor with purpose. A text buzzed from my mother. "Looking forward to seeing you at the church." The words were polite, so simple, they could almost be kind. I closed my eyes and remembered plastic tablecloths in church basements, ham sandwiches wrapped in wax paper, the way my mother's hand used to press my shoulder lightly when I reached for a second cookie. She has always loved a smooth moment. She has also always trusted appearances far more than truth. Loyalty can be a quilt or a blindfold. Both are warm, but only one lets you see where you're going. I set the phone face down and asked Alicia to add the number to the file. Not to punish my mother, to protect my balance. Thomas stepped into the doorway and asked if I wanted to choose between two fabrics for the banquette. "Not now," I said, "but do not change the spec without me." He smiled that quiet yes, that says he understands the difference between being busy and being clear. There are people in my life who do not need me to audition for their respect. They know what the work looks like when it is done right. I took the elevator down to the test kitchen. The team was arriving in that easy joking way that makes a room feel solid. Lena glanced up and I told her I had moved Mara to shadow her for the early dinner push. She nodded and went back to trimming fennel to the thickness you can barely see on a knife. Richard asked if I wanted to taste walnut oil on its own before the lemon dressing. "Walnut first, then lemon," I said, and we slipped into the rhythm of tasting and adjusting. That feels like a prayer no one needs to announce. The dressing was a breath too sharp. We brought it into tune with a whisper of honey and a pinch of salt, so fine it might as well have been a thought. We plated unplated and found the point where the bitter greens stopped arguing and started singing. By the time we finished, the upset from the call had settled into a manageable place in the back of my mind. It had not disappeared. It had simply taken its seat behind things that deserved my attention more. The roster, the line. The younger cooks were learning that confidence is not volume. The salad that finally tasted like winter was done right. Back upstairs, the sky had gone slate-colored, and the river had that evening shine that comes before the bridges light up. I set my phone to silent and put it face down in a drawer. People who have never had to teach others how to treat them will call this dramatic. People who have done it will recognize it as housekeeping. There is a difference between locking a door and closing it. I am not locking anything. I am only choosing to insist that if anyone wants to enter, they learn to knock. The next morning I arrived before the sun had any interest in the river. The building smelled faintly of citrus cleaner and cold steel. I walked the line with a clipboard and a cup of coffee, counted pans, checked greens, tapped the cooler log with my pen the way I always have. Routine steadies the mind. It also opens the door to memory. Mine went back to the years when my hands were never without a stain of lemon or bleach, when I learned how to survive on grit and repetition, and the small pride that grows in the quiet corners of a kitchen. From 2013 to 2016, I studied hospitality management at a local Chicago program that did not care about glamour. It cared about showing up. I waited tables at a neighborhood place where the menu changed only with the seasons, and the owners knew every regular by name. I scrubbed the line at night until the steel reflected the ceiling lights and the drains ran clear. I logged cooler temperatures with a stubby pencil and a patience I did not yet know I possessed. I paid the fee, sat the Serve Safe Manager exam, and passed because I was stubborn enough to refuse any other outcome. It was not romance. It was competence layered one shift at a time. Richard Harmon noticed me in the back of a storeroom where most people avoid looking. I was cleaning a shelf while building a cost sheet on a scrap of paper, counting lemons and converting ounces to pounds, with a mind like a tired calculator. He watched and then said in that plain voice he uses for useful information that I should come to see the books. He pulled me into safety protocols, into the logic of receiving and storage, into the idea that a kitchen is a living system and a brand is only as strong as the parts no one applauds. He let me stand beside him when a health inspector arrived unannounced, and he let me answer when she asked about tagging shellfish and holding temperatures. The first time I got it right, he did not praise me. He moved on. That was the praise. Years rolled forward on the same rails. I learned the sounds of a line that is about to fall behind, and I learned how to give one instruction that turns panic into movement. I learned to count backwards from the end of service and make a timeline in my head that kept everyone out of the weeds. When I felt brave enough to think about a place of my own, I was already in love with the parts of the business most people ignore. I knew that if I ever put my name on a door, it would not be a door to a trend. It would be a door to a standard. In 2019, I put on a black dress that made me feel like a grown woman, and I carried a deck I had rewritten more times than I would admit. I sat across from Patricia Winters in a small conference room that looked out over a gray slice of the Loop. I told her I wanted to build a flagship fine dining restaurant in Chicago as the proof of concept and then expand to resort properties where the menu could breathe with the ocean and the sky. I told her my numbers, my margins, my plan for training and retention, my obsession with safety and the unglamorous math of food cost. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she said she would fund half. The rest I would have to find. The funding came with something more valuable than money. It came with doors to people who had done this at scale and rules that forced me to stay honest. She required reporting that did not permit wishful thinking. I welcomed it. Guardrails make speed safer. In 2021, I signed a lease in River North with build-out deadlines that looked like the inside of a stopwatch. The space was a beautiful headache. Brick that needed ceiling plumbing that needed patience. A landlord who wanted a calendar on the wall with everything circled. Cash flow grew tight the way a belt does when you have washed it too many times. We made choices. We cut decor where it was merely pretty. We kept training where it made us reliable. We argued with contractors by day and with recipes by night. There were moments when I could feel the fear tug at me like a child. I tucked it into a chair and told it to sit quietly while the adults worked. Standing in the present, watching my cooks trickle in and set knives on boards, I understood what those years bought me. Not glamour, not easy. A foundation. A way of doing business that turns chaos into service and service into trust. The kind that lets you sign a lease with deadlines and keep your word anyway. The kind that lets you look a brother in the eye and know that the respect you owe yourself was earned in the dark hours before anyone was watching. By late afternoon, the room carried a quiet glow that felt like a welcome, not a performance. Thomas had signed off on the last details. Pale oak along the walls, rough stone framing the pass, and open kitchens so guests could see the work and the workers could see the guests. He called it Midwest Coastal. When he first sketched it for me, a kind of lakeshore light, an honest grain that refused to be fussy. We did one final walk. Host stand server turns clear sightlines from the bar to the pass. Nothing ornamental that would slow a tray or steal a step. Costs had nudged higher than our board allowed the way. Any beautiful space tries to test your resolve. I trimmed the pieces that existed to be photographed and kept the ones that would hold up a chair or a shift. Less shine on the fixtures, tougher fabric on the seats. I left the training budget untouched. Skills keep promises that decor cannot. If the room said we value care, the staff would be the proof. Lena arrived first in her white sleeves rolled hair, neat enough to make you fix your own. She is the kind of sous chef who can hold 2 menus in her head and set an entire station right with 3 instructions. Around me, she wears a small layer of armor. Owners who cook sometimes chase the spotlight rather than the heat. I heard her tell a prep cook that owners often step onto the line only when a photographer lifts a camera. I let the remark pass and asked her to run the full prep with Richard. I wanted weights logged and stations ready a full hour ahead of schedule. No surprises. Just readiness. Richard took the expo like a coat that fits. He began to call tickets in that steady rhythm the room would learn to trust. We checked burners, tasted the stock that had gone low and slow since morning, ran knives across stones, even though they already held an edge. Ritual settles a team. Before doors. I brought everyone in by the pass. The menu stays simple on purpose, I said, and simply asks for precision. The room will excuse a scuff near the pass. It will not forgive a plate that cools before it lands. Soft openings started as a quiet ripple and gathered speed until the dining room was a river with order to it. 2 tops, 4 tops, bar snacks, a celiac note, slipped to me by a server who breathed through her nerves and carried on. Lena found a misfire at the grill and folded it out of sight with a clean switch. A new Garda manger leaned bitter on a salad. I tasted, pointed to a touch of honey, and watched her find balance on the second try. The kitchen took corrections like a team that cares more about the plate than about pride. I placed myself where a guest could see me and where my crew could catch my eye if they needed a cue. Not in charge of the show, not off stage either. Present. A neighborhood critic took a stool at the bar, ate without commentary, scribbled in a notebook that had the soft corners of long use, and left by the front door like any other diner. Later, a brief note described the room as clear and sturdy and the cooking as unforced. That was all. It was enough. Between tickets, I felt the double tug of scrutiny and responsibility. The sense that praise and doubt arrive as twins. This is how it is when something new opens. You do not explain. You repeat the right motion until it speaks louder than questions. We wiped plates with small circles, tucked napkins, with the same corners every time sent dishes hot, and gathered them back empty. When the birthday candle turned up for a table by the window, I lit it myself with a steady hand and a small wish that had nothing to do with luck and everything to do with endurance. Closing came the way it always does, first in pockets, and then all at once. We drank water at the pass and ate a pan of staff pasta that tasted like salt and relief. I thanked the team for the way they took direction and gave it back to one another. I thanked Lena for catching the grill before it slid, and Richard for keeping the cadence that makes a kitchen breathe instead of gasp. Then I said it plainly. One good night means we do it again tomorrow. When the room finally quieted down, I walked the floor alone. I set my palm on the stone by the pass and felt it was cool. I noticed a faint scuff near the corner and let it stay as a mark that the place had a first night and survived it. Out by the river, a boat eased under the bridge, low voices rising and then fading. In the kitchen, the racks were lined with dry pans, and the last towel hung straight. I shut off the pendants one by one and let the flagship rest so it could wake ready to prove itself in the only way that matters, service after service. January laid out a board I could read at a glance. Gray blocks for training, blue for vendors, green for investors, each square tugging at the next. Marcus set a packet on my desk. Clean columns. Clear totals. No adjectives required. Last-minute flights were shaving our margins and knocking training out of rhythm. Delays slid into overtime, missed connections, pushed prep, and the trend lines rose together like a tide that ignores your plans. Miami opened in the spring of 2022. Morning light came early, the room smelled of citrus and scrubbed wood, and twice a month I flew down to get new hires settled and stations drilled. A storm pinned me in Atlanta that first month, and we lost a crucial prep day. Miami limped through the weekend. It was not a fire, but it was smoke in a place that should have stayed clear. Back in Chicago, Marcus circled a number and kept turning pages. The point had already been made. Maui followed in 2023. The view could make a person reckless if the work did not keep them honest. We wrote dawn receipts for fish and pre-service checks timed to the sun. I spent a week on guard manager teaching a young cook how to ride the 7:30 rush instead of fighting it. The return trip turned 10 hours into 22 after a missed connection, and the next morning my body felt wrung out. Our schedule staggered and the ledger caught it. By early 2024, we signed a lease in Las Vegas. The city rewards theater but punishes sloppiness. We built a kitchen that could feed 1,000 covers in a week without losing respect for a single plate. The expansion forced an old truth into sharp focus. Travel was the weak seam. Marcus brought a second report that lined up late arrivals with compliance dips and overtime. Video lessons could not replace a person standing shoulder to shoulder on the line. I called an operator I trusted from years of moving chefs and gear across the country. We talked management under Part 135. Duty days. Maintenance cycles. and the difference between owning a toy and buying an instrument that earns its keep. We sized the plan to need not ego, 12.5% in a Challenger 350 for the long hauls between Chicago and the coasts, 6.25 in a Citation Latitude for mid-range hops that keep a calendar from choking. Marcus and I ran the pro forma until the sheet stopped arguing. We signed when it was work, not wish. The first week with shares I left before dawn, closed my eyes for 90 minutes, and landed in Miami with room to run a sauce training before lunch. We filmed a short clip for our internal library useful for July hires and nobody else. On the flight home, I read vendor contracts at altitude and landed with enough patience to taste a new dressing and give the cook time to adjust it. No applause. A kitchen doing what it should do when the tools fit the job. By the end of the first quarter, Marcus slid me a one-page summary and let me enjoy it. Total travel costs had dropped just under 15% compared with ad hoc charter. On-time training held above 90%. The fog around the edges cleared too. Fewer frantic texts, fewer placeholder videos, more steady faces on the days they mattered. Marcus said the trend was holding into the next month and reminded me that equipment only earns its keep if the work improves. I told him that was already written into the plan. There were small mercies in the cabin. Early light that did not stab the eyes. Coffee that stayed in the cup instead of on a sleeve. The luxury I kept was sleep. 2 hours between time zones gave me back a temper I could use, not lose. I told the team directly. The shares are here to keep training on time, to make investor meetings efficient, and to let us answer real emergencies. They do not rewrite anyone's worth. In Maui, I met a fisherman on the dock at first light and moved his delivery window by an hour so prep could meet the swell. In Las Vegas, I sat with servers and walked a sellout Friday, minute by minute, until pacing matched the kitchen's range. In Miami, I ran a surprise safety drill on a quiet Tuesday and found 2 small cracks we sealed that afternoon. Twice I flew out and back in a single day, and woke up the next morning able to teach without snapping. That is what the airplane is for. The shares also handed me back pieces of leadership that travel had been stealing. I visited a new pantry cook midweek to say accuracy comes first and speed grows from that ground. I met a young manager in Las Vegas for 30 minutes to practice coaching without raising a voice. I walked with Thomas through a material choice in Chicago that would take a beating and still look clean a year later. None of it called attention to itself. All of it held the brand. Marcus asked for one more rule to keep us honest. Every flight would tie to a training and investor conversation or a fix on the floor. No vanity, Miles. I agreed and wrote it down. I pinned a short note in the back corridor where only staff would read it. We use tools that make us better at hospitality. We do not confuse tools with value. Value is how we treat each other at the station, and how a guest feels when a plate lands hot and right. On a Friday, I stood in a doorway and watched 2 cooks debate the angle of a knife, then nod, then return to their boards. The Miami calendar pinged with confirmations. Maui texted a photo of dawn fish on clean ice. Las Vegas sent a lineup sheet that made sense at a glance. The board on my desk no longer looked like a game to be won. It looked like a plan we could keep. I set travel for the week, closed the calendar, and walked back to the line where the measure that matters never changes, service after service. I went to New York because manners still matter to me, even when respect does not flow both ways. I packed a simple dress and a handwritten card, nothing more. The itinerary was short and efficient. Land deliver the gift, pay my respects from a distance, and fly out. I told myself to expect nothing, and then I told myself again because old hopes like to slip back in when your back is turned. Manhattan met me with that winter brightness that makes the street shine like glass. The hotel pulsed with wedding energy. Flowers moved through the lobby on rolling racks. A photographer checked a battery pack against his palm. The elevator filled with perfume and nerves. I stepped out on the designated floor and felt the temperature of the corridor change. A small knot of relatives stood near a console table with a silver bowl, the kind of place where someone might leave place cards or peppermint. They spoke softly in the way people do when they want to be heard without owning the words. I caught the phrase "a reception for the deserving." I did not stop walking. You can hear the meaning without collecting the letters. At the suite door, a coordinator with a headset consulted her clipboard and tried to place me. "Sister of the groom," I said, and watched a calculation pass behind her eyes. She smiled quickly and drifted back to her list. Elizabeth turned the corner with a small retinue. She wore the kind of dress that floats when the person inside it walks without fear. She greeted me with polite warmth, a hand to my forearm, a single breath that carried my name. I answered in kind. No performance. No old stories. Two adults recognized that the day belonged to ceremony, not excavation. I handed the wrapped box to the concierge on the lobby level, because the desk felt like neutral ground. Inside was a set of crystal coupes that belonged to my grandmother, cleaned and boxed with a note that wished them better days and steady hands. I asked the concierge to deliver it to their suite and to add my card. Then I stepped into the city air and called a car to Teterboro. In the back seat, I texted Alicia. I told her I would not attend any part of the wedding and that all family contact, if it arrived at work, should go through PR and be logged in. She replied with a thumbs up in words, not icons, because she knows I prefer plain language when a line is being drawn. I scrolled past messages I did not plan to answer. A cousin asked what time I would arrive at the church. An aunt sending a photo of a bouquet, as if color could soften memory. I set the phone face down and watched the city slide by. On the bridge, the river looked the way rivers always look from that height, both near and impossible to grasp. I thought about guest lists and how easily a piece of paper can pretend to measure worth. I thought about kitchens and how quickly a person's value is revealed when the ticket rail fills and hands start to move. The gap between those worlds is wide. I have learned which one feeds me. Near the tunnel, the driver asked if the radio volume was fine. I said it was. I closed my eyes and breathed the way I teach young cooks to breathe when the first rush hits. In for 4, hold for 4, out for 6. The body calms when you give it numbers. The mind follows when it is ready. At Teterboro, I walked past a row of cars idling with ribbons on their antennas, guests arriving with the buoyant energy of people certain they belong. I am not angry at belonging. I am careful about the price it asks. My presence is not a prop. It is not a favor. It is not a camouflage for someone else's story. It is a choice I get to make, and today the choice was to leave before the ceremony made a scene of hierarchy and called it joy. The cabin door closed with a soft click I know by heart. I buckled in, set the phone to silent, and let the engines turn the ground into distance. New York fell away in orderly lines. My breath evened out. The afternoon stretched ahead like a clean prep list. I did not owe anyone more than this, a quiet exit made on my terms. The email arrived as Chicago shook itself awake. Producer Maya Chen introduced a Chicago food feature that would follow teams sourcing and operations not celebrity gloss. I read it twice, then forwarded to Alicia with a short note that we would consider only if protections came first. Within an hour, Alicia had our legal counsel on a video call and a printout of the proposed agreement on my desk. We sat shoulder to shoulder and went through it like a prep list that cannot afford a miss. Filming rights would belong to CNN. That was expected. We negotiated a limited preview right for factual verification, only things like business hours on a lower third, names of staff titles, sourcing notes, training timelines, and the count of locations. We would not touch the emotional arc or the edit for tone. I asked for clear language on what could not be recorded under any circumstances. No filming of health inspections, no guest data at host stand or on screens, no shots of reservation systems, credit card slips, or private notes about allergies with names attached. Alicia marked filming zones in the draft the way she tapes a studio floor. Rooftop herbs at golden hour. The open kitchen from the guest side of the pass. The pre-service lineup. The walk in the door from the threshold outward, never the whiteboard with purchasing numbers. the test kitchen for training footage. Off-limits included offices' vendor contracts and any internal dashboards. Legal asked for certificates of insurance and a clause that any media crew would follow our safety rules on the line, like any third-party contractor. Maya's team proposed Tuesday evening, November 12, 2024 for the shoot. Call time, late afternoon, cameras live for the early push B-roll after close. The air date was set for Sunday night, November 24, 2024. Those dates felt real enough to place on a calendar. We confirmed them by email with polite firmness. I forwarded the confirmation to Marcus and to Richard and put both into a run of shows that looked exactly like the plan for a holiday service. I assigned roles the way I do for a busy night. Alicia would be our point with the field producer. Richard would control the floor and call tempo. Lena would manage the kitchen liaisons and approve any over-the-shoulder shots near sensitive stations. Thomas would walk the room before cameras rolled and remove anything that could distract or trip a cable. Marcus would secure documents and cover any boards that carried numbers. We built a short release packet for staff and a guest notice at the entrance that explained filming was underway and that we were available to seat anyone who preferred a camera-free experience. In pre-meetings, we agreed on stop rules and hand signals. If a hazard arose, the crew would step back from the line. If a guest objected mid-service, the camera would turn down and hold position. If a young staffer needed a breath, Lena would make space and we would regroup without fuss. There would be no interviews on the fly. Any voiceover needed would be recorded in a quiet corner of the test kitchen after service with time to think and water in reach. I sent a note to the team that set expectations in calm language. We would do our work as we always do. The story would be theirs to shape and ours to keep honest on the facts. We would not dramatize mistakes. We would fix them the way we always fix them, with hands and with process. A camera does not change a station standard. Marcus came back with a one-page budget for staff meals and end-of-night recovery. He asked for 2 extra dish hands and 1 porter for cable control so the crew would not lean on our team for labor. He also asked for a buffer on the training roster the next morning to avoid fatigue. I approved it because relief is cheaper than burnout. The week before the shoot, Alicia held a walkthrough with the field producer and location manager. They tested angles from the guest side so no one would need to swing a lens over hot pans. We placed floor marks for tripods where a runner would not clip them with a tray. We rehearsed the pre-service lineup and practiced the handoff of plates to camera without cooling guests' food. It felt like staging a ballet with oven doors. On the morning of November 12th, I read the agreement one last time. I initiated the clause that allowed a narrow factual preview. I signed the page that banned recording of inspectors and guest data. Then I set the pen down and felt my shoulders fall half an inch. In the afternoon, I printed the run of the show and taped it to the inside of the walk-in door where the crew would not film. Doors at 5. Lineup at 5:15. Cameras green at 6. Cut at 9:30 unless the room asked for mercy. At 4, I walked the rooftop and picked mint with a prep cook who had never been on television. She said she was nervous. I told her nerves are a sign you care, and that care is what the camera should see. Downstairs, Richard checked the headsets. Lena sorted the station clips. Alicia stood at the host stand with a stack of releases and a voice like a welcome mat. I stood by the pass and let the hum of the room settle the last of my doubt. The opportunity was real, and so were the guardrails. We had done the work to be ready. At 5 in the morning, my phone buzzed on the nightstand with the kind of vibration that knows where to land in your bones. A message from Nolan Price said the scallops for tonight would not arrive due to logistics issues. I sat up before the second buzz finished and called Marcus. He answered on the first ring because numbers do not sleep when a shoot is on the calendar. Marcus said he was already at his laptop. He pulled the purchase orders and checked the carrier portal. He told me the pallet had been scanned at the city depot at 3:18 and then rerouted to another kitchen uptown at 4:02. He sent me screen grabs of the waybill and the reroute alert. I told him to save everything to the vendor file and to print a hard copy for the binder, because ink has a way of calming people when tempers rise. I texted Richard and Lena that I would be in by 5:30 and that breakfast would be coffee and solutions. Then I called Nolan. I kept my voice steady the way you do when adrenaline would like a stage. Nolan said the carrier had a shortage of drivers and a mislabel on the pallet. He said he was working on it. I said we would follow our standard clauses for substitution and penalties, and that I expected a written plan within 30 minutes. I reminded him that the contract requires an equivalent product, same size, same grade, same day, or we engage our backup and charge the difference. He went quiet in the way people do when they realize the other person is reading from the playbook, not improvising. On the car ride in, I called our backup supplier in Miami. The owner picked up on the second ring because good partners keep early hours. I told her we needed dayboat scallops dry U10s, same spec as usual, and that we needed them in Chicago by mid-afternoon. She said she could get them on a first flight and hand them off to a trusted local courier. I asked for a temperature log from the pack to pass off and a photo of the seals. She said she would text as soon as the boxes were on the plane. We confirmed the price, I approved the rush fee, and she sent the invoice while I was still in the back seat. By 5:30, I was in the walk-in with a clipboard. The shelf where the scallops should have been stared back like an empty seat at a table you set with care. Lena came in with a pen behind her ear, calm and focused. I told her the situation in 3 sentences and handed her the revised prep list. We would shift a few specials, lean into the lakefish, and hold the scallop dish until the backup shipment landed. She nodded, crossed off 2 items, and started reallocating hands without a sigh. Marcus came down with printouts and a face that said he had already built 3 versions of the contingency. He put the email thread waybill screenshots and a memo to file in a clear sleeve. He said he would notify accounts payable to withhold payment on the original shipment pending resolution, and he would open a ticket in the vendor performance log. I told him to add a note that we were not assigning motive. We were simply documenting the facts. At 7, the Miami supplier texted a photo of 2 sealed boxes with timestamps and a copy of the temperature strip affixed inside. She followed with a flight number and an estimated arrival at O'Hare just after 1. Marcus updated the spreadsheet. Richard adjusted the production timeline so we could push the scallop prep into the mid-afternoon window. Alicia drafted a short internal note that said we had swapped suppliers to ensure quality and availability and that there would be no further comment. I approved the note because plain statements travel better than drama on a busy day. At 1:30, the courier called from the back door. I met him with an instant read thermometer and a receipt. We opened the first box together. Cold air rolled out in a clean wave. I checked the core temperature on the pack and read the strip. Both sat where they should. I initiated the log, noted the time, and thanked him for the sprint. Then I took the trays to the prep table myself, because sometimes leadership is the set of hands that does not delegate the last mile. Lena watched me portion and pat dry the first dozen. She said the muscle looked good and the smell was right clean and sweet like low tide at dawn. Her eyes softened in that way people have when they see that talk and practice match. She called a young cook over and had him watch the angle of my hand as I placed each scallop on the towel. Small lessons when nerves are high build a quiet kind of confidence. Marcus stepped in with a quick update. He said Nolan had sent a written apology and explanation from the carrier and an offer to credit the invoice. Marcus said he would still file the performance note because files are for patterns, not feelings. I agreed. We can accept an apology and still keep records. Both truths can live in the same folder. By 3, the trays were labeled and stacked, and the station looked like a promise we could keep. Richard ran a short drill for the pass, so the handoffs would feel easy when the cameras pointed their glass at us. Alicia checked the entrance signage one more time and refreshed the release stack. Thomas walked the room with a coil of tape and tucked a cable where a heel might find it. I washed my hands and looked at the clock. The scramble had been real. The tone had stayed even. The paper trail was clean and complete. Before lineup, I stepped into the hallway and let my breath settle. Then I went back to the line and set the first scallop in a pan just to hear the sound it makes when heat meets cold and everything right now drowns out everything else. The day had tried to bend us. We held our shape. Mid-prep, the kitchen had that clean thunder of knives on boards and running water, and then the room shifted. A woman in a city jacket stood at the threshold with a small tablet and a neutral face. Karen Lopez, health inspector. She introduced herself to Richard and showed identification. We had agreed with the network that inspections were never to be filmed. There were no cameras in the building yet, but I sent Alicia a quick note anyway. Inspection in progress. No recording. We will update when finished. She replied that she would remind the field producer when they arrived to keep their gear parked until we signaled clear. Richard pulled the training binder and the last month of logs. His hands know where the paper lives, like a line cook knows where the salt lives. He laid out cooler charts, sanitation cycles, and the sign-in sheets for food safety training. Karen accepted them with the same calm I use for a ticket stack. She walked with Lena to the cold stations. I stayed with the shellfish tags and temperature logs because those are my heartbeat items on any day and today especially. I set the tags in chronological order and matched each to the delivery dates on file. Then I opened the log this morning and pointed to the entries for the replacement scallops core temps, recorded and initialized with timestamps. Karen asked Lena to open drawers and lift pans without rearranging anything. Lena did it with the grace of someone who keeps a station honest by habit, not performance. At garde-manger, Karen paused at a small tub where an herb vinaigrette cooled. The label had the product name and initials, but the date mark had smudged. She raised an eyebrow. I stepped in with a fresh label, and a pen wrote the date, time and station, and placed it so it would not rub. She nodded. A small fix, but it is better to make it in the moment than to make a speech about intention. We moved to the walk-in. Karen checked the ambient temperature and asked me to describe our procedure for receiving and tagging shellfish. I told her we keep harvest tags attached to each container until the last serving from that lot is sold. Then we file them by date for 90 days. I pointed to the file box and read off the most recent 3. She entered notes on her tablet and asked if anyone had had to discard time temperature control foods in the last week. I told her we had tossed a quart of aioli after a hold time ran over by 10 minutes and that the discard was logged and initiated by the cook and by me. She asked to see the entry. I showed it. The truth keeps its own memory. She walked to the dish area and the hand sank. Soap and towels present. The water is hot. She asked Richard to recite the dilution for sanitizer, and he did it without looking. She stepped back to the center of the room and told us what she had seen. The small labeling correction at garde-manger had been addressed. The rest of the kitchen was compliant. Her tone stayed the same from start to finish. I thanked her for the visit, and she left us with a copy of the report. We filed it and returned to prep without a ripple. Calm comes from knowing that standards are not a speech. They are the next action and the one after that. By late afternoon, the crew rolled in cases and tripods and stayed on their marks near the guest side of the pass. Alicia spoke with the field producer at the host stand and handed over releases. Thomas walked behind them with a coil of tape securing any cable that might want to become a tripwire. I shed my blazer, tied back my hair, washed my hands, and took guard manager. Richard called the lineup. We reviewed the allergy protocol because cameras or not, the standard does not change. Separate board. Separate knife. New gloves. Clean towels. Verify order ticket and verbal confirmation from server. Document substitution if needed. Breathe. Execute. The first rush hit at 6:19. Tickets stacked into a neat skyline. I started with cold plates that demanded perfect geometry and cold food that demanded not an ounce more time than needed. A server slid a ticket to the front that carried a nut allergy. I read it, met her eyes, and repeated the note back to her. I cleared my board, replaced towels washed gloved, and pulled ingredients that had no cross-contact. I moved the garnish to a fresh ramekin and swapped the spoon. I called Lena over not for show for a second set of eyes. She checked the path from reach to plate. She nodded once, then moved on because trust is a moving thing when service is live. Heat rose from the line in waves and waved right back. Richard's voice kept time like a metronome you forget is there until someone tries to rush. The camera crew stayed at their permitted angles and let the room breathe. No one played to the lens. We worked. The scallops arrived from the hot side with the crust that sounds like a whisper when a knife leans in. I dressed the salad that bedded them and sent plates to the pass, still cool where cool belonged and warm where warmth belonged. The allergy table ate safely. They sent back empty plates and a folded napkin. That is my favorite review. Between pushes, I wiped my station and restocked herbs. The rooftop mint from earlier had the sharp scent that lifts a plate by half an inch. Lena passed behind me and tapped a corner of my board that had drifted from the square. She did it without words, and with that small nod that says, "Yes, we are seeing the same picture." Richard called fire on a wave of tickets, and the room leaned forward and carried it. By 9, the tempo eased. The crew moved to B-roll and soft shots of the dining room that never once crossed into our off-limits zones. Alicia posted a final note on the clipboard, confirming the time we would clear the cameras. Thomas checked the tape on the last cable. I pulled my board-tossed towels to the bin and washed my hands until the day ran off my skin. The kitchen exhaled in a way only kitchens do when the last plate is gone, and the heat starts to think about being only warmth. I looked down the line and saw small things that tell me a night went right. Knives resting clean on magnets, pans drying upright, notes in the log written in steady hands, a pair of cooks comparing the count on herbs and smiling because they had guessed right. The inspector had come and gone. The cameras had watched without changing who we are. The room had eaten well. Respect for the craft did not ask for a speech. It asked for the next plate done right, and then the next. The evening of the broadcast felt like a Sunday that had learned to stand up straight. I finished the last walkthrough at the flagship, checked the week's training roster, and went home to a living room that smelled faintly of lemon oil from a morning wipe-down. I set my phone on the coffee table, face-up sound on, not because I needed attention, but because I wanted to witness the night honestly. The network block began at 9. I sat with a glass of water and a legal pad, an old habit from years when notes were cheaper than nerves. The feature opened on the roof. The camera moved through the herb beds where the mint and thyme do their best work, close to the soil and far from applause. A breeze lifted the leaves. The caption named the garden and the neighborhood nothing more. The next cut went to the prep room. Young faces concentrated on small tasks, knife work, clean and deliberate sweat at the temples from focus rather than heat. The voiceover said our kitchen ran on training and repetition. I felt my shoulders settle a fraction. They showed the line from the guest side of the pass just as we had agreed. Richard's voice came through like a metronome threaded under the images. Lena's hands guided a new cook through a pickup, a finger to a corner of the board, a nod, when the angle was corrected. There was a short moment with a vendor at the back door, a handoff of crates and a temperature check, the kind of exchange most people never see, and that I love for its quiet honesty. The editor let the moment breathe. Midway through, a sitting senator who is a regular appeared for a single sentence about coming to eat without ceremony, about trusting a kitchen that respects its work. It was not a campaign speech. It was a diner speaking like any other person who has found a place worth returning to. The caption that followed on a lower third noted my fractional jet shares. It read like an operational detail, a tool for coordinating training and emergency travel between cities. No glitter, no puff. I breathed out slowly and let the room be a room again. Time during a broadcast does not move like time in a kitchen. It stretches and contracts. By 9:28, the piece had rolled through the last sequence cameras on the pass as plates moved quiet and fast. At 9:30, the credits for the segment closed with the names of people who did the work. I turned down the volume and listened to the ordinary hum of the building pipes ticking an elevator cable somewhere in the core moving a neighbor home. At 9:58, the phone began to vibrate. One text, then a call, then another. The screen lit with a list that felt like a family roll call turned inside out. By 11:47, the first 3 missed calls had made their place at the top. Dad Robert, Mom Margaret, Jason. I looked at the names and did not touch the screen. I had set the boundary when it was quiet. I kept it now because it was loud. The phone continued to buzz and then settle and then buzz again. I wrote down the time and the total in the corner of the legal pad because numbers help me keep the shape of things. I did not read the messages that began to stack behind the calls. I closed the email app without opening a single subject line. I typed a short note to Alicia. Family outreach expected. Please route all to PR and log per policy. She replied with a brief message and said she would build a folder first thing in the morning. The room was steady around me. The hum of Sunday night returned, the kind that holds rather than demands. Sleep came in pieces the way it does before a big service. Each time I woke, the phone showed a new count. At 7:30 Monday morning, the total sat at 100 missed calls. The number looked round and strange, like a milestone at the side of a road I had never planned to travel again. I set the phone to silent for another 48 hours, the same way you set a timer on a low oven and walk away because you trust the heat to hold where you put it. Then I showered, pulled on my jacket, and went to the flagship for lunch service. The kitchen greeted me with voices I knew and a rhythm that does not care about air dates. Bins of washed greens, a pan of roasted chicken bones waiting for water, a schedule tacked to a corkboard with names written in steady hands. I tied on an apron and walked the line with a cup of coffee that cooled as it should. Marcus came by the pass with a small nod that meant he was already logging the overnight messages. Alicia sent a brief update that the folder was open and organized, that nothing needed my immediate attention. A server asked me to taste a dressing. I dipped a spoon, let it sit on my tongue, and asked for a breath more lemon. The cook smiled and reached for the citrus. The world in its best form had returned to its work. The calls could sit where they were. Respect is not a ringtone. It is the way a plate lands hot and right in front of someone who comes hungry and leaves seen. I hung the legal pad on the hook by the office door, dated on top, and stepped back onto the line where the day waited without judgment. At noon on Wednesday, the front desk rang my line with a careful voice. My parents, Jason and Elizabeth, were in the lobby. Security was already standing at an easy distance. I asked the concierge to keep them comfortable where they were and told security to hold the line at the elevators. Then I booked the small glass-walled conference room off the lobby, the one with a round table and nothing on the walls except daylight. I poured 4 waters, left the door open, and set my watch to 30 minutes. They came in together and looked smaller against the glass than they did in my memory. I sat first to keep the room from turning into a stage. I said we had half an hour before an internal meeting and that I would end the conversation when the time was up. Jason spoke first. He used the words people reach for when their version of the story has been interrupted. He said he did not know. I answered with the sentence I had saved for years. You never asked. My mother reached for a tone that always used to work on me. My father cleared his throat, as if a speech could still rearrange facts. I kept my voice level and set out the reasons we were in a public space and not in my office or upstairs. This was a workplace. My colleagues deserved calm. Whatever happened between us would not ripple into a room that runs on trust. I laid out the conditions one by one, simple and measurable. First, no belittling my work or anyone else's work. Not in private, not in public, not as a joke told with a smile. Second, not using me as a prop for anyone's image. No requests for photo opportunities, introductions, or social leverage. If you want presence, you earn relationships. Third, no unannounced visits to my workplace. All contact comes through channels we agree on. If any one of these is violated, all contact pauses for 6 months with no debate. I asked them to repeat the conditions back to me. They did haltingly, and I wrote the date and the terms on my pad. I told Jason there was one more truth to put on the table, not as a triumph, but as context. Some of the guests he had described as elite were already our regulars. They eat here because they like the food, and they respect the work. That does not raise their worth or mine. It only proves that status is a noisy instrument and craft is a quiet one. The air in the room loosened at the edges. Elizabeth folded her hands and looked like someone who had come prepared to be gracious. My mother's eyes shone in a way that made me remember birthdays and also omissions. My father stared at the tabletop and nodded once, a small gesture that used to mean the discussion was over. Not anymore. I kept the clock in sight. I said that if they wanted a real conversation, we would have it on Friday evening at a neutral restaurant that did not belong to my group. No cameras, no theatrics, and no last-minute additions to the guest list. I suggested 7 o'clock at a quiet place on the north side I knew for good food and not a single reason to posture. They agreed without argument. I confirmed the name, the time, and the expectation that everyone would arrive on time and leave on time if the talk went sideways. When the half-hour closed, I stood. I thanked them for coming and for keeping their voices low in a building where my people were working. I walked them to the lobby and watched them step out into the November light, the kind that makes the glass in the front doors look like water. Security relaxed a degree. I asked the front desk to note the visit and the end time. On my way back to the conference room, I sent Alicia a summary for the PR file and copied Marcus for the record. Boundary conversation completed. Conditions set and acknowledged. The next meeting was scheduled off-site for Friday the 29th at 7. Back upstairs, I washed my hands and changed the watch back to service time. My team gathered in the larger conference room for the meeting I had promised to start on the dot. I took my seat with an even breath and the sense that a door had been closed without a slam. In the kitchen, the lunch line ticked forward like a metronome. Order in. Action. Played out. The workplace stayed whole, which was the point. Friday evening put a soft shine on the sidewalks and made the windows of the little North Side restaurant glow like paper lanterns. I chose the place because it had nothing to do with my world. No one in the room knew my staff or my vendors. The menu was tight and honest. A round table waited near a wall of framed black and white photos, none of which featured anyone we knew. I arrived 5 minutes early with a calm I had earned the hard way, and told the host we would finish on time. They came in as a small knot coats, folded over arms, eyes searching for signals. I stood long enough to greet them, and then sat so we would all be level. A server set water and left us a breathing space. I opened by restating the rules of the evening in plain language. We were here to talk like adults. We would leave the table if voices rose, or if anyone tried to turn the room into an audience. We were not here to edit the past. We were here to decide whether the future deserved any shape at all. Jason began. He looked like a man who had slept little and finally decided to stop pretending. He said he had started therapy the previous week. He said he was facing the years of contempt he had served to me like it was medicine I ought to swallow. He admitted that he measured people by status and that my success outside that measure had felt like a threat he did not know how to name. He said the therapist used words like envy and displacement and asked him to listen without defending. He said he wanted to try that here. My mother set her hands on the table as if steadying something that had slid. She said she had not truly seen me not for a very long time. She described how easy it had been to let Jason take the space in every room and to call that leadership when it might have just been habit. My father cleared his throat, and the familiar sound did not move the air the way it once did. He said he had cared more about appearances than fairness, and that he had told himself that keeping peace was the same as keeping balance. He admitted it was not. I listened and kept my breathing measured. When they finished, I restated the 3 conditions, because clarity is not cruelty. No belittling my work or anyone else's. No using me as a prop for image or access. No unannounced visits to my workplace. Violation of anyone would pause all contact for 6 months. No debate, no half measures, no quick apologies to erase consequence. I asked each person to confirm they understood. They did. I watched their faces while they repeated the terms not as a test but as a record my mind could keep when memory tried to forgive too fast. The server returned. We ordered simple food that would not distract us from the theater. A salad dressed with care, a roast chicken with pan juices, and a side of greens that still remembered the field. Elizabeth spoke then, careful and direct. She said she wanted to be in a family that did not run on performances. She said she had married Jason for the man she believed he could be, not for the rooms he once wanted to conquer. She asked what would help us keep to the new shape. I said notice. For any future meeting, we would give at least 72 hours notice. We would respect each person's schedule and would not turn a no into a referendum on loyalty. If someone needed to reschedule, they would offer 3 alternate windows. Everyone nodded. The rules were not romantic. They were breathable. When the food arrived, we ate like people who had decided to try again with knives and forks instead of speeches. Between bites, I shared a piece of news not as a flourish, but because the calendar was real. In early 2025, we would merge Thomas's design studio into the hospitality group so our expansion could carry one standard from blueprint to plate. The paperwork was drafted. The teams already worked like neighbors separated by a low fence. Folding the fence made sense. I also told them we were launching a scholarship for young women in culinary arts. Tuition and living stipends plus guaranteed mentorship in our kitchens or in partner restaurants we trusted. I said I wanted to be for someone the person I had not always had. Someone who sees early and clearly that the work has room for her. Jason said therapy had a way of making a person want to confess everything and fix it by morning. He said he knew that was not how people heal. He asked what I would need in the next month to feel safe continuing contact. I told him I needed consistency more than gestures. No surprise visits. No big gifts dropped at the host stand. No long messages cataloging regret. A short check-in by text every other week was enough, and only if he had something grounded to report, like a session that had taught him how to pause before he spoke, or an apology he had made to someone who was not me. My mother asked if she could take me to lunch in December. I said yes with a condition. No reminiscing that edits the past into a softer picture. We would talk about the present, about how she was learning to see me, and how I was learning to set a boundary without flinching. She agreed. My father said he would like a tour of the flagship after the holidays. I told him he could book a reservation like any guest, and that if my schedule allowed, I would step out to say hello, but that my team would not be asked to perform a reunion. We finished our plates and let the last of the conversation cool the way a pan does when the flame is off, but the iron still holds heat. I asked if anyone had anything else they needed to put on the table. No one did. We stood. I offered my hand to each of them. We ended with a firm handshake, not a forced hug, because bodies tell the truth that words cannot rush. Outside, the evening had grown colder. We put on our coats. They walked to their car. I walked to mine. A grown-up meeting had been had, not perfect, not final, but real. Early winter yielded to a pale March, and the merger papers turned from drafts to signatures. Thomas's studio folded into Harbor and Hills with the neatness of a well-ironed apron. Designers moved their laptops onto our floor, sat with chefs over coffee, and learned how a drawing becomes a station that survives a Saturday night. The test kitchen reopened with new burners and a whiteboard that carried only 3 words: safety, standards, ethics. We built drills that felt like real life. Allergen walks through with timers. Thermometer checks without warning. A role play for a guest in distress that taught compassion without theater. Lena took the title of Executive Sue and the responsibility that follows a title you have already been living. On a week when I flew a triangle between Miami, Las Vegas, and Chicago, she stood at the pass through 2 hard services and kept the cadence that lets a team breathe. I watched the footage on our internal system from a quiet hotel room and felt that twinned pride and relief a leader earns only by letting someone else lead. She walked the line with her hands behind her back, corrected with a nod, praised with a cleaner plate. We chose not to renew Nolan's contract. Marcus sent a crisp letter, no drama, just the facts and the effective date. We moved to a supplier who sends what they promise and tells the truth when they cannot. The quality has been steady ever since. The scallops smell like a clean tide. The fish arrives on ice that has not had time to think about melting. The invoices line up with the deliveries, and the emails carry timestamps instead of excuses. That kind of calm is a quiet form of justice. My parents began to make reservations like everyone else. A two-stop near the window on a Thursday, a four-top for an early Sunday dinner. Sometimes the server brings me a folded card after they leave. Wishing you a smooth service. No requests for a visit to the kitchen. No attempts to make a meal into a stage. Jason sends me articles about boundary work and says he is doing the exercises. I read some of them on airplanes and smile at the way a person learns to name what they once armored over. He texts short messages that land the way they should. On time. Not heavy. Respecting the pauses. The fractional shares did exactly what I bought them to do. I bundled the Miami and Las Vegas trips into 3 days sleep, 2 hours over the Rockies, and land ready to teach a sauce class that does not cut corners. Maui fits into a week that begins with purchasing meetings and ends with a quiet beach that I visit only long enough to remember there is a horizon. I come home sharp for both the kitchen and the boardroom. The airplanes are not a crown. They are a set of wings on a calendar that used to ask too much from the body under it. We launched the scholarship in February with a small gathering in the test kitchen. No press. Just 8 young women, 2 mentors from partner restaurants, and our team. We handed out aprons and chef coats and a binder with tabs for food safety, station setup, and workplace dignity. We cooked a simple lunch together, then sat and talked about where courage sits when you are the only woman on a line and what to do when someone mistakes your silence for weakness. The room felt like the one I once needed and did not have. At the end of the first quarter, the network emailed to ask if they could return once the scholarship class began their first rotations. I wrote back the same day. When the students arrive and the facts are ready, we will talk. Right now, I prefer to work quietly. They answered with grace. Not every story needs a sequel to be real. Some need time and good records. Richard now splits his week between calling the pass and training new managers on the rhythm that keeps a dining room from tipping into chaos. Marcus has a fresh spreadsheet that makes me ridiculously happy, a simple set of lines that show travel costs, staying in range, and training sessions hitting on time. Alicia keeps our external voice calm and our internal file tidy. Thomas's team has started to draw new kitchens that can be cleaned in 10 minutes after the last plate, a kindness to dish crews that feels like an apology to every dish pit I ever worked. Life did not turn into a parade. It became a steady line of work that holds. My mornings begin with coffee and a walk through the kitchen. My days end with a drive home past the river and a minute of quiet in the garage before I climb the stairs. My phone buzzes less. My shoulders sit lower. I do not need to prove anything. I need to keep the promise I made to myself when a brother called me a collector of trash and thought that would be the final word. The final word is the way I choose to live. With boundaries that hold. With craft that does not shout. With a table that welcomes people who show respect to the work and to one another. Sometimes I find a small note tucked near the host stand after close. Wishing you a smooth service. I tuck it into the drawer with the clean pens and think about how far a family can travel when the route is marked with conditions and kept with consistency. Revenge turns out to be quieter than I imagined. It sounds like knives on a board and a plate landing hot and right. It looks like a woman resting well and standing up straight. If any part of this story sits next to your own, if you have been discounted by people who should have known better, tell me how you set your boundaries and how you kept your peace. Your words might help someone else hold their line tomorrow.
We've detected unusual signals from grid section 7B on Mars, Dr. Phillips announced, his voice echoing through mission control. They seem to be emanating from the water discovery site. I watched from my station as my stepsister Amanda's face turned pale. She knew exactly what grid section 7B meant. It was where I had discovered the first evidence of liquid water before she had me removed from the project. My name is Olivia Parker, and 2 weeks ago, I was the lead signal analyst for NASA's Mars Reconnaissance Project. That was until Amanda, the newly appointed mission director, convinced the board I was emotionally unstable and unfit for such a critical position. The irony of the situation wasn't lost on me as I watched her frantically tap at her tablet, trying to make sense of the incoming data. The signals were unlike anything we'd seen before. Complex patterns that seemed to pulse in rhythm with the Martian water's subsurface movements. Dr. Foster, Amanda called out, her voice tight with barely controlled panic. Can you make anything of these patterns? The older scientist shook his head, his forehead creased with confusion. These aren't standard electromagnetic frequencies. The algorithm isn't recognizing any known patterns. Of course it wasn't. The signals were encoded using a system I had developed specifically for the Mars Water Project, a system I hadn't shared with anyone yet when Amanda orchestrated my removal. I leaned back in my chair, remembering the day everything changed. I had just confirmed the presence of liquid water beneath the Martian surface using a specialized frequency detection method I'd spent years developing. It was the breakthrough we'd been waiting for, proof that Mars could potentially support life. This is impossible, I had whispered, double-checking my readings. Amanda, look at this. My stepsister had rushed over, her eyes widening as she saw the data. But instead of sharing my excitement, she had quickly composed herself and said, I'll take it from here, Olivia. Why don't you take a break? I should have known something was wrong by the way she couldn't meet my eyes. Within hours, she had called an emergency board meeting, presenting my discovery as her own while simultaneously questioning my mental stability. Dr. Parker has been showing signs of extreme stress, she had told them, her voice dripping with fake concern. She's been working excessive hours, seeing patterns where none exist. I'm worried she's becoming a liability to the mission. Now, watching the chaos unfold in Mission Control, I felt a strange sense of calm. The signals were getting stronger, more insistent. Whatever was happening beneath the Martian surface, it was trying to tell us something. The frequency is changing, someone shouted. It's like it's responding to our probe's presence. Amanda spun around, her perfectly maintained composure finally cracking. That's not possible. Run a full diagnostic on all systems. I knew what they would find. Nothing wrong with the systems, just an increasingly complex series of signals that only I could understand. The encoding method I developed wasn't just about detecting water. It was about understanding its behavior, its interaction with the Martian environment, and potentially its relationship with something we hadn't even imagined yet. Ms. Parker. Dr. Phillips' voice cut through my thoughts. You were working on signal analysis before your departure. Any insights? Before I could respond, Amanda interrupted. She's not authorized to access this data anymore. We'll figure it out ourselves. But the tremor in her voice betrayed her uncertainty. The stakes were too high now. This wasn't just about professional rivalry or family dynamics. This was about potentially the biggest discovery in human history. Actually, I said, standing up slowly, I think I might be able to help. I walked over to the main display, aware of every eye in the room following me. Those patterns you're seeing, they're not random. They're encoded using a specialized algorithm I developed for the water detection project. The room fell silent. Amanda's face went from pale to red. You never submitted any documentation about a new algorithm, she said accusingly. I was going to. I replied calmly, the day you had me removed from the project. Dr. Phillips stepped forward, his scientific curiosity overriding any political concerns. Can you decode these signals? I nodded, my heart racing despite my outward calm. I can. But I'll need full access restored to my systems and complete autonomy in my analysis. Absolutely not. Amanda protested. She's trying to manipulate the situation. But as if to punctuate my point, the signals suddenly intensified, creating patterns across every screen in Mission Control. The message was clear: something was happening on Mars, something unprecedented, and I was the only one who could understand what it was trying to tell us. Dr. Phillips looked at Amanda, then at me, then at the increasingly complex display of signals. His decision was visible on his face before he even spoke. Restore Dr. Parker's access. Full clearance immediately. As I sat down at my old station, I could feel Amanda's glare burning into my back. But it didn't matter anymore. The truth was about to come out, and no amount of office politics or family drama could stop it. The signals from Mars continued their mysterious dance across my screen, and for the first time in 2 weeks, I allowed myself to smile. Sometimes the best revenge isn't about getting even. It's about being exactly who you are, exactly when it matters most. Let's see what Mars is trying to tell us, I whispered, my fingers flying across the keyboard as I began to decode the message that would change everything. For the next 12 hours, I immersed myself in the signals while Mission Control buzzed with nervous energy around me. The patterns were more complex than anything I'd seen before, suggesting that whatever we discovered wasn't just water, it was something far more intriguing. Dr. Phillips, I called out, not taking my eyes off the screen. Look at this frequency modulation. The water isn't just present, it's moving in coordinated patterns. He leaned over my shoulder, his breath catching as he saw the data. This is unlike anything we've ever recorded on Mars. Amanda hovered nearby, trying to maintain her authority while clearly feeling it slip away. It's probably just subsurface geological activity, she said dismissively, but her voice lacked conviction. I pulled up a three-dimensional model of the signal patterns. Now look at the regularity. These aren't random movements. There's a distinct sequence repeating every 47 minutes. The room fell silent as I manipulated the model, showing how the water's movement corresponded with the signals we were receiving. Years of research, countless nights spent developing my algorithm. It was all leading to this moment. The water, I explained, my voice steady despite my racing heart, seems to be flowing through what appears to be artificial channels. Artificial? Amanda scoffed. That's impossible. You're seeing what you want to see. Dr. Phillips held up his hand, silencing her. Continue, Dr. Parker. I brought up another screen showing the decoded signal patterns. These aren't just electromagnetic frequencies. They're carrying information, specific sequences that repeat and evolve. It's almost like what? Dr. Phillips leaned closer. Like a language, I finished quietly. The silence that followed was deafening. Amanda's face had gone from skeptical to ashen. She knew what this meant. If I was right, this wasn't just about finding water on Mars. This was about finding evidence of intelligent design, possibly even ancient Martian technology. We need to inform the board immediately, Dr. Phillips said, reaching for his phone. Wait. Amanda stepped forward. We can't go public with this yet. We need more verification, more tests. Like the verification you needed before removing me from the project? I asked calmly, never taking my eyes off the data streams. Before she could respond, new signals started pouring in. The patterns were changing, becoming more urgent. I frantically typed, trying to keep up with the incoming data. Something's happening, I announced, my fingers flying across the keyboard. The water movement is accelerating. The channels, they're activating in sequence. The main screen filled with streaming data, the patterns now visible to everyone in the room. Even those who couldn't decode the signals could see that something extraordinary was occurring. Dr. Parker, Dr. Phillips's voice was tense. What exactly are we looking at? I took a deep breath, knowing my next words would change everything. I believe we're watching an ancient Martian system reactivate. The water isn't just present, it's part of something bigger, some kind of mechanism that's been dormant until now. Amanda stepped forward, her composure finally cracking completely. You can't prove any of this. This is exactly why we removed you. These wild theories without proper evidence. Actually, I interrupted, pulling up my original research files. I can prove it. These are my complete findings from before you had me removed, including preliminary evidence of the channel system. Evidence you buried when you took credit for the water discovery. The room went completely still. Every eye turned to Amanda, who stood frozen, her face a mask of shock and growing horror. Is this true? Dr. Phillips asked her quietly. Before she could respond, the signals suddenly intensified. New patterns emerged, more complex than before. I leaned forward, my heart pounding as I decoded them in real time. The system, I said, my voice barely above a whisper, it's not just channels. It's a network. An entire underground network of interconnected waterways, and it's all coming online. The implications were staggering. This wasn't just a natural phenomenon. This was technology, ancient Martian technology, awakening after who knows how many millennia. How long have you known about this? Dr. Phillips asked Amanda, his voice hard. She stumbled over her words. I just thought. She didn't know, I said, finally turning to face them. She saw the water discovery data but didn't understand what it meant. She couldn't decode the signals, couldn't see the patterns. That's why she needed me gone, because she knew I was close to something big, but she couldn't figure out what it was. Dr. Phillips straightened up, his decision clear on his face. Amanda, you're suspended pending a full investigation. Dr. Parker will be resuming her position as lead analyst, effective immediately. Amanda opened her mouth to protest, but at that moment, the signals pulsed again, stronger than ever. Everyone's attention snapped back to the screens, where Mars was telling us its ancient story, one decoded signal at a time. I settled back into my chair, a mix of vindication and excitement coursing through me. This was bigger than Amanda's betrayal, bigger than office politics or family drama. This was about uncovering secrets that had waited millions of years to be found. Let's see what else Mars has been hiding, I murmured, diving back into the data streams. The truth was finally emerging, and I was the only one who could understand its language. 1 month after the initial signal detection, I stood before the International Space Science Committee, presenting our findings. The room was packed with the world's leading scientists, all eagerly leaning forward as I revealed what we discovered beneath the Martian surface. The network, I explained, gesturing to the holographic model floating above the stage, spans approximately 300 square kilometers. It's an interconnected system of channels, chambers, and what appear to be processing stations, all designed to move and potentially purify water. The audience sat in stunned silence as I showed them the animated sequence of the network's activation. The blue lines representing water flow pulsed rhythmically, following patterns we were still working to fully understand. Most remarkably, I continued, the system appears to be self-maintaining. It has mechanisms for preventing freezing, filtering sediment, and even redirecting flow based on pressure changes. The engineering is, well, it's beyond anything we've ever seen. From the corner of my eye, I could see Amanda sitting in the back row. She'd been demoted to research assistant after the investigation revealed the full extent of her deception. Her attempt to steal my discovery had backfired spectacularly, leading instead to the biggest breakthrough in Mars exploration history. Dr. Parker, one of the committee members, leaned forward. What are the implications of this discovery? I smiled, pulling up new data on the display. Beyond proving the existence of ancient Martian civilization, the technology itself could revolutionize how we approach water management on Earth. The filtration systems alone are centuries ahead of our current capabilities. The questions flew fast after that. How old was the system? Preliminary dating suggested at least 300,000 years. Was it still fully functional? Remarkably, yes, though we were still learning its capabilities. Could we replicate the technology? We were already working on it. After the presentation, Dr. Phillips found me in the hallway. Outstanding work, Olivia, he said, beaming with pride. NASA's approved your proposal for a dedicated research team. You'll have full autonomy and resources to continue studying the network. Thank you, I replied, still somewhat overwhelmed by how much had changed. There's so much more to learn. The signals, they're not just about water management. I think they're trying to tell us something about the civilization that built this. And you'll be the one to figure it out, he said confidently. By the way, your sister requested a transfer to the Jupiter program. I nodded, feeling a strange mix of emotions. Amanda's betrayal had hurt, but in the end, it had led to something extraordinary. Sometimes, I said, people's worst intentions can lead to the best outcomes. Later that evening, as I sat in my new office overlooking the NASA campus, I received an unexpected email from Amanda. Olivia, I know it's too late for apologies, but I want you to know that I understand now. I was so focused on advancement that I couldn't see the bigger picture. What you've discovered, it's changed everything. Not just for science, but for me too. I've learned a hard lesson about integrity and recognition. Amanda. I didn't reply immediately. Instead, I turned to my monitors, where the Martian signals continued their ancient dance. The network was still revealing new secrets every day, each discovery more fascinating than the last. Just yesterday, we'd found what appeared to be a control room, its systems still operational after hundreds of thousands of years. My phone buzzed with a message from Dr. Phillips. Meeting tomorrow at 900. Bringing in international teams. Your discovery is changing the future of space exploration. I smiled, watching the signal patterns pulse across my screen. The water network wasn't just a technological marvel. It was a message from an ancient civilization, proving we weren't alone in our quest to understand the universe. Amanda's betrayal had nearly derailed everything, but in the end, The truth had found its way to the surface, just like the water flowing through those ancient Martian channels. Sometimes the path to discovery isn't straight or fair, but if you stay true to your work and trust in your abilities, the universe has a way of revealing its secrets to those who can truly understand them. I turned back to my computer and began typing a reply to Amanda. The signals are getting stronger. There's still so much to learn. Maybe it's time we all started listening more carefully to Mars and to each other. The future stretched out before me, filled with possibilities I had only dreamed of. Mars was speaking to us, and I was ready to listen.